So this is the last installment of the migration, and this will be the final one for Unit 2, which is population. This one's more concerned with internal migration as opposed to international migration, so that's the main focus here. And then we'll mainly look at internal migration within the United States, but a lot of these principles also apply to other states as well, and the reasons why people internally migrate. So looking at specifically why people migrate within their own states, why they internally migrate as opposed to international migration, is because it's less disruptive on their lifestyle. The religion will be the same, the culture is going to be the same, the language, the sports teams. It's pretty much all going to be the same within the states. Now, I'm not going to say it's always going to be the same, because it could be different. You could get different dialects of whatever the dominant language is in the United States. It could be a different dialect of English. For example, you take the migration that I have from Michigan down to Virginia. The dialect of English changed. There's words that are used in the north where I'm from and they're not used down here. And then there are really two types of internal migration. There's interregional migration, intra-regional migration. Again, internal migration is region to region migration, and then intra-regional migration is migration within a region. And then we'll look at both of those. But then again, when it comes to migration, inter-regional versus intra-regional, it also always depends upon the scale at which you're working. So if we're going to take like the United States and we're going to look at internal migration within the United States by itself, then you're going to get a lot of inter-regional migration. Like what I did, I moved from the Midwest to the East Coast. But then even within migration, once I moved to the East Coast and I moved into Northern Virginia, with the migration that I have from Alexandria to where I am right now, it's going to be inter-regional again, because I'm moving from one part of Northern Virginia to another part on that scale. But if you back up a little bit, it's intra-regional because I stayed within the Northern Virginia region. We've had 4 major internal migration eras in the history of the United States. The first one was a colonial settlement. It's with the founding of Jamestown in 1607 up through 1790, which is the birth of the country. So this is really when we actually become called the United States. And this is predominantly the settlement of all of the land between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mississippi River. And even when I say the Atlantic Ocean and the Mississippi River, most of that is still from the Atlantic to the Appalachian Mountains, because you have to look at the intervening obstacles back then. The Appalachian Mountains would have been a significant intervening obstacle at this time period, because the mountain range would have presented problems getting across, in the sense that because of the lack of transportation technology, most of these people are either migrated by foot or by horse, and so that, I mean, the mountains, while they're not that big by today's standards, they were huge by the standards of that time period. So it's really the settlement of the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, with most of the people residing between the Atlantic Ocean and the Appalachian Mountains. And even within there, most of them are located to the north, as opposed to farther south, because the north started to pick up the textile industries with the shipping and the fishing industries in the north, and then the south, obviously being predominantly agriculture, you're going to have a lower population density because of that. Now, one of the things to take into account here is the slave population counted in this? The best guess is that the southern states were not counting slaves, or the United States government would not have counted slaves during this time period. So the southern states would have had a lower population density. If you count the slaves, obviously the population density is going to go up significantly, because you have a lot of people on a piece of land. But by best estimates, they're not counted. The next one is going to be the settlement of what we call the interior. This is kind of founding the country up until the break of the Civil War. And this is really settling in there between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River, and then kind of skipping over the Great Plains and then heading out west. We don't really settle the Great Plains yet, because if you think about the primary activities of the Great Plains that's predominantly agriculture today. In this time period right here, we haven't really mastered the mechanization of agriculture yet. Yes, there are a couple farming tools out there and farming instruments out there, but not by today's standards. So this is the settlement of moving on west, getting the Appalachians to the Mississippi River, kind of skipping over the Great Plains and then settling in on the other side there. Then we've got the settlement of the Great Plains. This is where we really mechanize industry. So this is industrialization hits hard here. It's hitting predominantly in the north. As it hits in the north, we start to see the agricultural technology improve in the Great Plains states. As a result, we get the surplus of food, population is able to go up. We're getting stage 3 of the Industrial Revolution here, and population's going up, plus we've ended the civil conflict that we had, and so things are looking up for our population here. And then the next one's going to be the recent growth of the South. Prior to the economic growth of the South, it was industrialization really only hit the North, and it was hitting the North because that's where the money was, that's where the labor was, and the South was focused on agriculture, and so the South really never industrialized back when the North industrialized. Today, though, as of about the 1950s or 60s, the South is starting to industrialize now, so we're getting this new economic growth in the South and this new economic boom in the South, and as a result, because of the economic prosperity of the South, people are migrating to the South from the North, and so it's kind of the opposite of what happened before. People are moving down there because the businesses are down there, jobs are down there, and remember, economic opportunity is the number one reason why people migrate, and so those opportunities are now in the South, and people are moving to the South. One major migration pattern that we had was called the Great Migration. This is the movement of blacks from the South to the North. A couple of reasons why they're moving. Number one, to escape the discrimination of the South. Even though slavery ended, that didn't mean that the discrimination or racism ended in the South. And so people are trying to escape the persecution of the South, the cultural, political persecution of the South, and then also the economic opportunities available in the North. Because the North had industrialized and the South really never industrialized, these African Americans are moving north in search of jobs, and so you look at the destination cities, but they're ending up, it's not like they're going to the rural areas to work on more farms, they're heading north to work in factories. Plus you get our involvement with World War I. With our involvement in World War I, lots of white males are serving in war. That opens up factory jobs for these African Americans, and so they move up to the north into the factories. Now, coincidentally, just because they were leaving to escape racial discrimination and racial persecution, but unfortunately that didn't necessarily happen all the time, because a lot of times when they got to the north, it was like the first time that these Anglo-Americans had seen this many African Americans, and as a result, with this change, it was met with resentment, and we got the continuation of the racism and the racial discrimination in the northern states, and it kind of picked up, and it really hit hot and heavy in the 1930s into the 1950s and 60s. We had some major race riots in Chicago and Detroit in the 1960s because of this mass migration from the South to the North of African Americans. And again, they're searching for economic opportunities. Now, that new growth of the South is kind of being ushered in by this migration that we have both the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt. If you remember, the Rust Belt is that area of southern Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, western New York, that is, in western Pennsylvania. And it's called the Rust Belt, again, because of the development of the steel industry in that place. Now, the rusting part, if you think about rusting is not a good thing. And so this label of the Rust Belt is not necessarily a good thing. It refers to the economic decline of this region. And one of the reasons they are experiencing economic decline is because the industries are moving to the south, and they're moving to this region that we call the New South, or the Sun Belt, which includes the former Cotton Belt states. So when you look at the Cotton Belt, it's kind of Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, those states are the Cotton Belts. North Carolina, kind of a little bit in there too, with the Cotton Belt. Now that we're getting this region called the Sun Belt, and the Sun Belt even heads farther out west as well, and it's this new South of economic prosperity. So it's kind of the opposite of what was happening to them 50, 60, even 100 years ago. And so we get the mass development of industries down there. Now, there's a couple reasons for that industrial growth down there. These industries are moving down there, but why did the industries move down there? What would convince you as an employer, as an industry, to move to this new region? Well, first, the states of the New South have passed state laws that are making labor cheap. when it comes to any industry, labor is always the most expensive cost that you're going to have in any industry. And so in the North, labor was getting very, very expensive. With unionization, labor was getting out of control, and these unions were really just driving up the cost of labor. And as a result, these southern states of the New South, or the Sun Belt, have passed state legislation. They're called right-to-work laws that are keeping the cost of labor down because they're not allowing for unionization. Then, so that's the first one, the cost of labor. The second one is going to be the proximity to energy source. When the North industrialized, the major energy source was coal. And so we were getting coal from the northern Appalachian region. We were getting our iron ore from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and then everything was kind of coming together in this western Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan area. Well, now our energy source is petroleum or oil, and so that's down in the Gulf region. And so they moved to the south because the labor was cheaper, and number two, they got closer to their energy source, which is what they needed. Then the other thing you need to take into account is the market. Once I have this product established, who am I going to sell this to? Well, we have these new markets opening up in the south, and as a result, you want to get closer to your consumers. You want to get closer to the people that are buying these things. So they're going to start moving south, especially if your product that you're making is what we call a bulk gaining activity. Bulk gaining activity meaning that all of the inputs put together weigh less than the final product. So as you go through the manufacture of a product, it gains weight or increases in bulk. So an automobile, a car, is a bulk gaining activity, which means you want to be closer to your market than you do your inputs, which is why almost all automobiles, even the foreign cars, Toyota, Nissan, the Scions, those cars are made in the United States because we are the consumers. So Toyota has a major distribution plant, manufacturing plant in Tennessee. It's because we're the ones buying the cars. It's cheaper for them to ship supplies here and build a car here than it is to build a car overseas and then ship the car here because it's a bulk gaining activity. Now, clothing, on the other hand, like your t-shirts, are a bulk reducing activity. The inputs weigh more than the final product, so as a result, you need to be located closer to your inputs, the cotton and the energy source, and you want to cut down the cost of labor because the product really isn't that expensive anyway. You need to cut down the cost of labor as much as possible, which is why so much of our clothing is made overseas, because it's a bulk reducing activity. So the new industrialization of the South is kind of been ushered in by laws, state laws, to benefit the employer instead of the employee. And then they're getting closer to their energy source as well, and they're getting closer to their markets. And so we get this mass growth of what we call the Sun Belt, or the New South. Now, as a result of this migration from the north to the south, we're getting a shift in power. As you know, the power in the House of Representatives is determined by the population of the state, which gets you to a certain number of electoral votes. So if you're looking at this map here, you're noticing that some of these southern states and some of these western states are starting to get a lot of power in the electoral college. Florida, Texas, California, Georgia, North Carolina are starting to get a lot of electoral votes, which is increasing their power, which means that they're going to have more pull within the House of Representatives. A couple of years ago, there was an FRQ about the center of population. When we talk about center of population, we're really talking about kind of the center of the population in the United States. So if you were to kind of take a map of the United States and I guess kind of put all of the people on top of the map, where's the center of all those people? Well, in 1790, you're seeing it's just southeast of Baltimore. So that suggests to us that, number one, most people are on the East Coast as opposed to the West Coast. And most people are in the north as opposed to the south. And then as we see time progress here, every decade we move farther and farther west and we're moving farther and farther south. So as of 2000, we are almost getting to the actual physical center of the population, center of the United States, physically speaking. And that's where our population is getting. So that's just saying right there that we are expanding out west and we are expanding out south. So our population, we have migrated west, and we are migrating south. And I would imagine, as if the trends keep up, that star for 2010 is moved south again, and it's probably moved a little bit west again. We have our moments where we don't move that much. You're going to see in there 19, 20, 30, and 40. We didn't really migrate that much. Well, it's because it was World War II. We didn't really migrate that much. So that was the cause of that not really big of a jump right there. 1830, 40, 50, those are times of major westward migration. So you've seen there where we go from Moorfield in eastern West Virginia to almost outside of West Virginia. That's because of the major westward movement during that time period. Just a couple diagrams of internal migration. The one on the left of 1995, you notice that everything points to people are moving to this new south, this new sun belt, and not really backflowing to the north. Well, as of 2003, you can see that this migration has died down a lot. So we're seeing that this lasted for maybe 10, 15 years, but it really has not kept up the steam that it had back then. And so the migration is kind of balancing out. So you see the migration from the south and Midwest, Midwest to south. We're actually seeing more people move back to the Midwest than we are to the south. And that's the opposite of what we saw back in 1995, where we had 1,600 coming to the south and only 1,000 going to the Midwest. So it's the trends are starting to change. I guess you can see the economic development is plateauing. We're kind of reaching that apex here, and so the 2003 model is more of your typical model of just standard industrial development everywhere. Now, with industrialization, you're going to get migration from rural to urban areas, and this occurs everywhere. And so urbanization began for the United States in the 1800s, and so as we start to industrialize, we start to experience this urbanization. In the United States in 1800, only 5% of Americans lived in the urban area, and then you can see by 2010, 75% of Americans live in an urban area. So most of us today live in an urban residence or an urban neighborhood. So in MDCs, the urbanization is caused by industrialization, because that's where the jobs are. So people start moving to the jobs, or moving into the cities for the jobs, urbanization. Then you go through this time period where you have major urban problems: crime, sanitation, poverty, housing, or lack of housing. You have all these problems, and then the MDCs, because they're industrializing, they're acquiring more wealth, and so they're able to fix those problems because they've got the money. Now we're starting to see this trend occur in LDCs, except in LDCs this is not caused by industrialization, not in all of them. And some of it is, but in a decent chunk of them this is being caused by the medical revolution. So the medical revolution is causing a population increase. A lot of those people are moving to the cities looking for jobs, but the problem is they're getting to the cities, and because the industrialization is not occurring, they can't find the jobs. Not only is the industrialization probably not occurring, but then there's just so many more of them. So when MDCs did this, the population was lower. Now that LDCs are doing this, their population is so much higher, and the industrialization, if it is occurring, cannot keep up with the population increase that these LDCs are experiencing. So they can't find jobs, they can't find housing. This leads to the creation of squatter settlements, which you see over there on the right, with like kind of shanty towns. These shanty towns are made out of corrugated steel, corrugated boards. There's going to be probably no electricity, plumbing, communication, water in there, so you can imagine disease is going to be a problem, sanitation is a huge problem, crime is going to be a major problem, and these are things that are major problems for LDCs. In Latin America, these are traditionally called favelas, and so with the upcoming World Cup and Olympics down in Rio, it's going to be something that they're really going to have to focus on, is the favelas outside of Rio. What are they going to do with them? Because it's a major problem. The image down at the bottom there is Rio de Janeiro, so they're going to have to do something with this, because that's where the stadiums are going to have to be built in. And Rio, Brazil's not going to want people from around the world to see this when they get in there to watch the Olympics. So migration from urban to suburban, we're starting to see this trend in MDCs. This is not really occurring in LDCs at all at this point. We're starting to see people that migrated into the cities prior in search of jobs. Now they're moving back out of the cities into this new place we call a suburb. So if you look at the diagram, the yellowish with all the buildings and all that stuff, that's going to be your urban area. and then that ring outside that's going to be kind of your residential area, and then you get the next ring outside of there is more residential, and then outside is the rural area, so that the outside area is going to be the rural. And so that huge arrow, the 10.1 arrow, is this major migration of people moving out of the cities to that purplish area, which we call the suburbs. Now you see we still are experiencing more migration into the cities, and then we're also the migration into the cities is still continuing, let me put it that way, but most of the migration that is occurring is people moving out of the cities. And this started with the era of white flight back during the Great Migration, where African Americans started moving to the cities, and because of the racial discrimination and persecution, whites started moving out of the cities and started to create these new places called suburbs, because these whites still worked in the cities, so they couldn't get that far away because of inadequate transportation at the time. So now they still need to get in the cities, so they moved to these places called the suburbs. And now most of the migration that we do see is from one suburb to another. And so we're starting to see this trend of urban to suburban migration. This is not an economic migration by any means. So when we moved into the cities, that was economically motivated. This one's not. This is culturally motivated. We want green space. We want that lawn. We want that picket fence or the backyard so our dog can run around. So this is not an economic move. Now, we're only able to do it because of improved transportation and communication technology. If I move out to the suburbs and I'm on kind of one of those outlying suburbs, I don't necessarily have to go into work every day. So I still work in the cities, I don't have to go in every day because I can telecommute. Or there's improved transportation, there's a highway that goes there. So think about the Manassas area, think about the transportation networks. Yeah, they suck at times, but imagine not having those at all. Or being able to Skype or FaceTime with work and not actually just going there. Just think about the internet and the couple of the internet with email. Holy cow, emails have revolutionized businesses and allowed us to move farther away from where we worked. So you think about industrialization, people moved into the cities because that's where the jobs are, but they had to be located near their job because they're walking to work. Today we don't walk to work, we drive our cars to work, we get on public transportation to get to work, and so as that gets better, we can get farther away. And so we're getting this migration from urban to suburban of urbanization, where we are moving back out to the rural areas, and then again, it's all because of communication and transportation technology. We're not moving out there to farm, we're moving out there and we're still working in the urban areas. So this is going to cause a problem with us. If you remember the article that you read, Ready, Set, Grow, said that we're starting to encroach on the Great Plains again. Well, it's our agricultural area, so we are moving back to the rural areas. But this is the counter-urbanization. So what's going to happen? What's going to win out? Is the rural landscape going to win out? Is the agriculture going to win out? Or is the suburban setting going to win out? And that'll be something that we're going to have to deal with in the next 20, 30 years. This is a map of net in and out migration by county. You're noticing that in the northern states, especially northeast, you're experiencing a lot of net in migration, but not at that much of a scale. Now, in the Great Plains, you're experiencing a lot of net out migration. That's a result of the mechanization of industries, and so these people are moving out. Now, remember, net out migration, in migration, it just means that at least one person more is moving in or out, so it doesn't mean that it could be by the thousands or whatever. But you're starting to see a pickup again of immigration into the north. So hopefully that all makes sense to you. If you get any questions or anything, let me know. But that pretty much wraps up everything new with this unit on population. This is a big unit, it's a lot to take in, there's lots of models and all that stuff, but let me know if you got any questions.